So good afternoon or good morning, everyone. Welcome to our webinar titled Understanding Arboreal Bridges, When Are They Needed and How to Implement Them. Now, as people kind of join us, I'm just going to go through, introduce myself, and then go through some housekeeping items. We've had over 300 people sign up today, which is absolutely fantastic and fascinating. So really, really grateful for you all being here. To introduce myself to start, my name is Steve Bega, and I'm the technical manager at Animex International, which is part of EcoSupport Limited and recently the Adler and Allen Group. Within my role, I get the pleasure of helping to solve lots and lots of problems that help to mitigate the impact of infrastructure on wildlife and work to help provide solutions that keep people and wildlife safe, exploring a wide variety of ways we can reduce wildlife and infrastructure conflict whilst ensuring habitats remain connected. And one of the areas that keeps me busy, and I've been extremely lucky to work on in recent years, is on Arboreal and Canopy bridges. And this is what I'm going to talk to you about today, along with a group of esteemed guests, including Ian White from the People's Trust for Endangered Species, Hazel Ryan from the Wildwood Trust, and Tremaine Gregory from the World Wildlife Fund for Nature. Now, just some housekeeping. I'm sure you are all familiar with Zoom by now, but just in case, here are a few things that you may need to know throughout today's session. If you have questions, please do feel free to put them in the Q&A within Zoom itself. But we do also have a Slido running that we'll use during the Q&A and discussion sessions. Now, you can visit this by either using your mobile device and scanning the QR code on the screen now. I have put the link directly to it in the chat, and then you can also go to slido.com and then input that number there when prompted. I'm also here alongside my colleague Nadine, who will be helping to collate questions. And if you have any technical problems, please also put that in the chat, and we'll do what we can to help resolve any issues. We will be stopping for breaks at various points, but if you do have to step away, please don't worry. The session is being recorded and it will be circulated and uploaded afterwards. Now, a transcript should also be being captured and assigned to the recording and happening live, which obviously may help those who are hard of hearing, and especially also if English is not your first language. I don't anticipate we will take up the full 2 hours, but I wanted to give everybody kind of plenty of time to ask questions and interact, and ultimately for all of us to have a productive discussion on the topic towards the end. So, without further ado, I believe the best place for us to start would be to define precisely what it is we are discussing today. Now, this provides a bit of revision for those of you already familiar, but also clarifies the definition and topic for those of you who are not. Now, if for some reason you have no idea what on earth I'm talking about and have accidentally stumbled into the wrong webinar, please obviously do stick around. I promise that it will be fascinating. But if you do obviously have other things on your agenda, this may well be the good time to dip out before it's too late. So to get into it, what is an arboreal bridge, aka a canopy bridge or a wildlife rope bridge, as they're more commonly known as well in other parts of the world? Now, they are artificial structures often made from various materials that are installed over an area where habitats have been separated or fragmented and natural canopy connectivity is no longer viable. And these are used for various species all across the world, but are primarily used for marsupials, primates, and mammals. Now, the outline of today's session is as follows. To kick things off, we have the pleasure of welcoming Hazel and Ian, who will explain more about the ecology and biology of the Hazel dormouse, and which is typically the main driver for arboreal bridge considerations in the UK. They'll also take a dive into the understanding and current challenges that dormice face, along with celebrating the wonderful work currently being done to help them thrive. And as part of this, we'll explore the history of arboreal bridges in the UK and how they have helped and can help dormice and other species. We'll then look at why you might consider an arboreal crossing, outlining key factors and considerations that should be made to identify the need and appropriateness of a structure. And then to help understand when and why, we'll explore various existing or planned projects from within the UK. And this will naturally lead on to a step-by-step walkthrough of the entire process from identifying a need right through to the installation and beyond Then, before we take a break for questions and answers, I'm excited to introduce Tremaine Gregory, who's kindly offered her time and expertise to share a kind of wider worldview on how arboreal bridges and canopy crossings are being used in other parts of the world. So, as I mentioned during this session, we'll be approaching the topic primarily from a UK perspective, exploring the kind of standard process typically adopted for identifying and implementing crossings for Hazel dormouse. Now, however, what we're sharing with you today is also relevant to structures of various types, including many other man-made interventions that are all aimed at improving wildlife connectivity, such as shelves, underpasses, land bridges, etc., etc. So please also do bear that in mind. Now, for now, it's a kind of enough from me, and it is my pleasure to hand over to Hazel Ryan, who's kindly going to tell us more about dormouse ecology and the work her and her team do to give them a helping hand. Hazel.
Thanks very much, Steve. So dormouse ecology is a massive detailed topic, and I could happily talk about it all day. So I'm just going to give you a bit of an overview of it today. So the Hazel dormouse is our only native species in the UK. It's a small rodent. It's in the Gliridae family, so that's separate from our other mice and voles. And generally the adults weigh about 15 to 20 grams, but this varies with the time of year, particularly prior to hibernation, when they're putting on body weight for winter, and they can actually double in size. They have a distinctive fur, this lovely golden sandy brown colour, which you can see in the photograph. They can't really be confused with our other small mammals, apart from maybe the harvest mouse, which is a similar colour, but it's much, much smaller. And the Hazel dormouse has a long tail, which is about the same length of the body, about 7 centimetres, but it's not prehensile like the harvest mouse. So it can't grip with its tail, but it is very bushy, which helps it with balance when it's jumping and running along branches and jumping across gaps in the canopy as well, very short gaps. And we did some research at Wildwood with Manchester Metropolitan University, and they were looking at gaps, and they found that dormice could probably jump about 22 centimetres, but that was their limit, which is why we need these connections in the habitat. They're highly arboreal, so they don't really like venturing down onto the ground at all, apart from in hibernation. So in the autumn, they'll come down to the ground to build a hibernation nest, and then in the spring, they'll come back up into the trees. And they have other adaptations to this arboreal life, such as sticky pads on their feet to help them grip. And they have double jointed ankles as well, so that they can hang head first down a tree trunk or from the end of a branch to get to their food. They are highly nocturnal. So you're unlikely to see one in the daytime unless it's been disturbed or it's unwell or perhaps it's underweight. And they have very long whiskers, which they use like tentacles. They sort of sweep them out in front of them to feel their way around in the dark, and very large eyes and ears so that they can be on the lookout for predators and listen for them. And they can freeze for up to 40 minutes if they're disturbed while they're out climbing around on the branches. They weave a distinctive 2-layered summer nest, and this is for resting and for breeding. So both males and females build the nest. And it has a tightly woven centre of shredded bark, or sometimes grasses or sedges, or even bluebell stems, I find. And then that's surrounded by a looser layer of leaves, which are often picked green straight from the tree. And natural nest sites would be in tree hollows, hollow branches, old birds' nests, dense undergrowth such as bramble, or tangles of climbing plants such as honeysuckle or wild clematis. They often only have 1 litter per year, occasionally 2, but there have been a few recent records of possible 3rd litters in the UK, and also of young of the year breeding, because we always previously thought that they wouldn't breed until they'd overwintered for their first sort of hibernation. And we think this is possibly a response to climate change, having a longer, warmer season in the summer, and particularly when we have these Indian summers, they have time to have an extra litter. But we don't know if these late-born young really survive the winter. They may not have enough time to fatten up before going into hibernation. And the Hazel dormouse is a K strategist, so that means it's a long-lived species, but it breeds very slowly. And so it has to live a long time to make up for that. And we know that they can live for 5 to 6 years in the wild, and up to 9 years we found in captivity. So the next slide, please. So what do dormice eat? Well, they have a very primitive digestive system without a cecum, which is what herbivores normally have for digesting cellulose. So they can't actually eat woody plants and tough leaves. They need very easily digestible food. So they are successional feeders. So that means their diet varies throughout the season, and they have to switch when a particular food source runs out. So in the spring, they're feeding on pollen and nectar from flowers, and then the flowers in the woodland finish because most trees and shrubs are spring flowering. And then they switch to invertebrates in the summer, so things like aphids and caterpillars and galls. And then when most of the flowers and fruits are finished in the summer, and then you start getting into the late summer and the early autumn, they switch to berries, so things like blackberries, and then fruits and seeds off the trees. So that takes them right up until hibernation time. And this is one of the reasons why they need a really biodiverse habitat with a good range of species, and also a dense understory and good habitat connectivity to be able to move to different areas to feed and to be able to climb up and down into the canopy very easily from their nest sites. And we tend to think of typical dormouse habitat as being ancient woodland, but they're also found in unshaded scrub, early successional woodland, hedgerows, even gardens, conifer plantations, heathland, really anything that's got a complex structure that they can move through and build their nests in. Next slide, please. So dormice are quite sort of weather dependent. So they have sort of energy saving strategies which they use. And one of these is torpor, and it's often called summer torpor because it's like a mini hibernation, but at the wrong time of the year, basically, where they lower their body temperature to their surroundings, and that means they also lower their metabolic rate, and that lowers their heart rate and breathing. And it's a way to save energy if they can't go out foraging. And this can be either due to bad weather, so it's very cold, or very wet, because a dormouse fur is not very waterproof and it gets waterlogged very easily. And being such a small animal, they have a very high surface area to volume ratio and lose heat very, very quickly. Or another reason is lack of food availability. So perhaps we've had a very early warm spell in the spring and the trees haven't caught up and the flowers are not available for them. And this means that they're quite vulnerable to predators because when they're in this state of torpor, they can't react very quickly and they can't run away if a predator finds their nest. And then they usually hibernate from October through to April. And this really depends, though, on whether they've reached their minimum hibernation body weight and the weather conditions is actually to when they start going into hibernation. But it's usually after the first frosts in the autumn. If it's mild weather or they're very underweight, for example, a juvenile of the year, which was born quite late in the season, then they may actually stay active right through until December. And the hibernation nests are sited on the ground. So this is the time of year when they do come down from the trees. And it's where temperatures are more stable and there's a high humidity, as generally they don't drink during the hibernation period. Next slide, please. So dormice live at low population densities generally. So in most woodland habitats, for every one dormouse you have, there are about 10 wood mice. So they're much rarer than other small mammal species. And even in the best habitats, you only find about 10 adults per hectare, often fewer than that. But they have declined in both their range and their population size. They became extinct from 20 counties since Victorian times. They've suffered a 72% population decline between the years 2000 and 2022. So this means they're classified as vulnerable on the IUCN Red List. Although recent research looking at data from the National Dormouse Monitoring Programme suggests that actually it's a steeper decline than this, well, sorry, a bigger decline than this over a longer period. And actually they should be classified as an endangered species. And dormice have full legal protection now in the UK. And the main threats to dormice really are habitat loss, habitat fragmentation, and poor habitat management, and also climate change, but I'm not going to go into those details now because Ian is going to talk about that a little bit later. So what can we do? What is being done to help dormice? Well, the National Dormouse Monitoring Programme began in 1988, and now the People's Trust for Endangered Species has over 400 registered sites, which are monitored by volunteers. And I'm sure a lot of those volunteers are here watching today. And this gives us a good picture of trends in populations. It's a really large data set, and this can be analysed to look at the effects of weather and habitat and other variables on the population. There's also now a good range of methods that can be used to survey or monitor for dormice, certainly since I started doing dormouse work well over 20 years ago. So these include things like nest tubes, footprint tunnels, nut searches, and other new ones which are being developed which we might use in the future, such as eDNA. Habitat management practices such as coppicing in small coops and synthetic hedge cutting, tree and hedge planting are all also helping to restore habitats for dormice which previously weren't suitable. The Common Dormouse Captive Breeders Group, which Wildwood we are part of, have been working with the People's Trust for Endangered Species since 1993 to breed dormice to reintroduce back into the wild. So this is for areas within their previous range where they became extinct, but the habitats have been restored. And we have a national stub book at Wildwood, which we use to ensure the genetic diversity of the individuals that are released. And you can see a soft release pen here in the bottom left-hand corner. And we've carried out 38 reintroductions to 27 woodlands in 13 counties so far, and we hope to be carrying on with that in the future. And this year, 2 new long-awaited dormouse handbooks were published, both on dormouse conservation and mitigation. So the conservation one was an updated edition. The mitigation one is new. And the handbook, the conservation handbook, is a standalone book. So if you have the mitigation handbook, you also need to have that one because the two need to be read alongside each other. And both of these are now available from the Mammal Society, both as paperback books or as PDF versions. And I really recommend that you get these because there's so much detailed information in these on all aspects of dormouse ecology, habitat management, survey methods, and mitigation. And they're very, very useful for anyone working with dormice. Okay, I'm now going to hand over to Ian.
Thank you, Hazel. Right, well, as Hazel said, basically dormice have been declining in the UK for certainly since the 1970s, more likely since Victorian times. There's a contraction in range, there's a reduction in population. And the early work really on dormice started in the 1990s, where the 3 main things, again, that Hazel's mentioned, were impacting or negatively impacting dormouse populations in the UK. They were climate change, woodland management, and habitat fragmentation. Now, the implications around climate change are obviously kind of ongoing, but given that when dormice go into hibernation, we usually lose between 40 to 70% of the population every year during the hibernation period. So it's quite a vulnerable time for them. And what seems to be happening is because our winter climate seems to be becoming more variable, is for a hibernating animal, ideally it wants a good, stable, steady temperature over the winter to stay in hibernation, but our winters are becoming more variable. We have cold days and then followed by a warm day perhaps, and a few of those can bring dormice out of hibernation, and every time they do that they can basically lose energy until they simply run out of puff. So that can certainly have a negative impact on dormouse populations in that sense, but also we seem to be seeing wetter springs and wetter summers, which can have a negative impact on dormouse breeding, which also, when you're an animal that only produces a single litter a year, that's not good news at all. So climate change does seem to have an impact on dormice. Woodland management undoubtedly is negatively impacts dormice, or the way we manage our woodlands now. Dormice are very much a succession of scrub species, so that's kind of the scrubby understory area of woodlands. And if you look at many woodlands in the UK now, they're continuous cover woodlands, which means the understory gets shaded out from the canopy cover above, and also the higher numbers of deer that we have in the country at present can also then browse off that developing shrubby understory, meaning that the woods, as they grow up, become less structured and simpler. And that impacts not only dormice, but also impacts woodland birds, woodland bats, woodland butterflies. So any work we do with dormice, we can kind of consider dormice as an umbrella species. So we get things right for dormice, we get things right for a broad range of other species as well. And of course, one other thing that also is impacting dormice is habitat fragmentation. In the UK, which is a highly populated country with a very dense road network, a very dense rail network, that kind of separates habitats out, certainly for an arboreal animal that needs to use hedgerows, linear woodlands to be able to disperse from the woodlands of their birth into new areas. There's that connectivity has kind of broken down over time, and it's certainly not getting any better. So, and obviously, what we're talking about today, we can potentially make a difference to the habitat fragmentation and improve that using artificial means. Next slide, please. So, the first use of bridges in the UK came from work from Natural England. This was when developments were put in, and areas or woodland areas where dormice were known to exist were going to be fragmented by a new road going through, or a new railway going through, whatever it might be. And there is the early work was that actually those habitats needed to be connected by an artificial means. In the early days, it was considered adequate to actually put up, in essence, 2 telegraph poles, put a bit of thick rope between them, and dormice would happily use that. That was the idea, but there's not a single piece of evidence to suggest that dormice ever used them. But nonetheless, that was the standard mitigation approach. They then moved on into terms of, instead of using a single piece of rope, we would then put up a metal mesh tube, often filled with bits of rope, bits of branch, whatever it might be, to kind of give some shelter and protection to dormice as they moved across it. And you can see an example of that in the photograph. And again, the idea was that dormice would find these things, they then use them to cross a gap, and all would be well. Again, the problem is there's not a single piece of evidence to demonstrate one of these has ever been used. And all these projects were kind of standalone projects. So the one in the bottom picture was actually, I think, put in Wales. There were 3 bridges that went up, but these would have been designed by a consultancy trying to solve this issue of how do we help dormice cross the road. And that one that got designed looks a bit more like an obstacle course rather than an easy way for a dormouse to cross the road. And I have to say, out of the 3 bridges that got put up recently, one of those has been blown over, and the decision was taken not to put it up again. So you do have to question some of these ones in terms of how effective they were, because, as I say, there's not a single piece of evidence of any of these being used. One thing that we often get asked about is that there's evidence of dormice crossing roads. So do we need to bother with an arboreal bridge to help dormice cross the road? And the main piece of work highlighting that is by Shannon and Goubert in 2012, where they'd marked a population of dormice on the A38 down in Devon, and they found dormice, recorded dormice on both sides of, on a single side of the road and in the central reservation. But that didn't appear to be that frequent event. There was only 2 animals they recorded on one side of the road and in the central reservation. But it clearly demonstrated that dormice could cross a 2-lane highway. The only problem with that was actually there was no indication at all. They didn't do any work surrounding that site as to how good the population density was, or how high the population density was in dormice surrounding that survey site. And it may well have been that actually all the available niches for dormice were fully occupied, and actually dormice were kind of being forced to cross the road. And Devon is probably one of the best counties in the UK to see dormice, or where there are dormice populations. So it wouldn't be a great surprise if the population density around that road network was actually quite high, and that was kind of forcing dormice into areas they didn't wish to go. Interestingly, there was an earlier paper from McPherson et al., which they actually looked at the rural roads as barriers to small mammals, and they actually looked at bank voles and wood mice, neither of which considered particularly arboreal, and they found that even a small road was actually quite a barrier to our small mammals. So you do kind of think, as Hazel said, dormice are highly arboreal. So yeah, whilst there is evidence of them crossing roads, is actually perhaps we should do something to see, well, what do they prefer to do? What what would they like to do rather than actually being forced into this position. Next slide, please. So in 2015, People's Trust for Endangered Species did some work on the Isle of Wight looking at, well, our question really was, do dormice prefer to use an arboreal bridge structure, or are they happy crossing on the ground? Can you play the video, please, Steve? So what we did was we there was a PTES owner, a nature reserve on the Isle of Wight, and through our reserves runs an old heritage railway line. And going over the railway line was an old Victorian bridge, and we put up an arboreal structure above that bridge. And as I say, our question was, do dormice cross on the bridge or on the ground? And we answered that question by putting a long length of reptile fencing, so 200 meters with the bridge in the central part of it on either side of the railway track. We cut small holes in the reptile fence every 30 meters. The idea being that any small mammal run into the reptile fence would hit the fence, turn left and right, and we could pick them up on cameras. So you can see the reptile fence there, and we have this quite charming images of a young stoat family trying to work out their way as to how to get over it. But you can see the idea in terms of we created a barrier on the ground so we could pick up what crossed on the ground and what crossed on the bridge, which you can see above. So from that, we actually we saw no evidence whatsoever of dormice crossing on the ground. We only saw dormice on the ground in 2 videos out of 18,000. We had dormice on the bridge within 9 hours of the work being started, or with the bridge going up. And the evidence was we had at least 30 or 40 images of dormouse on the bridge structure with reasonable evidence of them actually using it to cross. So from this point, we actually then started talking to Animex, although they've been involved in the project a bit early because they sorted out all the reptile fencing for us. And it was then, how do we move this prototype bridge design into a commercial design? So when an arboreal bridge was needed, it didn't have to be kind of thought about and started from scratch, and also because we had a design that was proven to work. So we know the design works. We had dormice on it very quickly, but moving this onto a commercial design is challenging, not in terms of the design, but in terms of proving concept and certainly proving use of it. Because when, as I no doubt Steve will talk about later, when an arboreal bridge goes in an area, well, the reason it goes in is because there's considered to be dormouse in the area, dormouse in the vicinity. So usually before a bridge goes in, that habitat will be cleared, so the dormouse population will be pushed away. The bridge then gets put in. The habitat needs to be restructured and restored. That could take for dormice anything between 5 and 8 years. Dormice have then got to reoccupy that habitat. They've got to find the bridge, and then they've got to use the bridge. And of course, we need some sort of evidence capturing device to actually then demonstrate in the use in the bridge when we're not actually don't actually know when they're going to use it. So I think there are certainly challenges in using arboreal bridges in terms of proving use, but that doesn't mean I don't think we should be doing it. We should be persistent with them. Dormice are highly arboreal. I don't think we should be relying on them to cross roads. As I said, we don't know how frequently they cross roads. We don't know the impact on dormouse mortality they get in crossing the roads. And interestingly, once we'd finished this work on the Isle of Wight, we left the bridge up for another year. And there's the UK's biggest population of red squirrels on the Isle of Wight. And we have plenty of images of red squirrels basically using the bridge like a motorway. They weren't crossing on the ground at all. They were simply using it, as I said, across the bridge. So some of the footage that we picked up on the bridge, as I say, red squirrels certainly crossing on the bridge. The triangular structure that we use, this was copied from a Japanese design. And I think one of the attractions of this design was, rather than having a metal mesh tube, was actually there's multiple ways that dormice can actually traverse the bridge, either on planks at the side, or on the platform at the bottom, on the ridge at the top. So there's multiple ways they can cross the bridge, and also there's multiple access points as well. Because the sides of the bridge are open, it's quite easy to train tree branches along the side of the bridge, giving, as I say, dormice or other species multiple access points to get onto the bridge to use it. But certainly dormice seem to make full use of all areas they could use to cross. So she's climbing on the roof there to go on the apex of it. The little tunnels you see that one at the moment are just shelters to give the some shelter to the dormice as they cross it, so they don't feel so exposed when they're using the bridge to get across. We don't put anything inside the bridge, certainly because that, or potentially that would be a problem for Highways England in terms of obviously the more material you put on a bridge, the higher risk there is of things falling off. So we try and keep the design as simple as possible. But yeah, so clearly the design, the shape of the design clearly worked and worked quite well in terms of that we had dormice on it so quickly and the fact other animals used it after. Yeah, I'll hand over to you then, Steve.
Thank you, Ian. Thank you, Hazel. Yeah, so in short, since that study with PTES and the kind of prototype designs, what we have done at Animex within myself and kind of team is to kind of take that design and find out a way that how it can be engineered and made appropriate to be approved and installed on various different highway structures as a stat of different types of roads, different types of areas. And just to kind of recap, I guess quickly before I get into the more of the details on the actual I guess a bit more of the meat of today's presentation and webinar about the process going from not having a bridge to having a bridge, just to kind of highlight again why habitat connectivity is important, and it's becoming more widely recognized and actually becoming a legal requirement in lots of countries to ensure that habitats remain connected. And here are just again a few reasons why. Habitat connectivity obviously allows wildlife movement and migration. Connected habitats let animals move freely to find food, mates, and suitable breeding or nesting areas. It supports genetic diversity. Movement between populations, again, reduces inbreeding and maintains healthy, resilient gene pools. It enables climate adaptation. As climate conditions shift, species can relocate to more suitable environments if landscapes are connected. Reducing wildlife vehicle collisions. Safe, connected pathways like wildlife crossings help animals to avoid roads and other human barriers. And then also maintaining ecosystem functions. Connectivity supports natural processes such as seed dispersal, pollination, and predator-prey dynamics across landscapes. Well, I guess most importantly, like, when is it appropriate to consider a kind of artificial arboreal or canopy bridge? Now, the most important thing to remember is that artificial crossings are a substitute for natural connectivity. If natural connectivity is possible, then that should always, always be the priority. But if natural connectivity cannot be achieved, examples of when an artificial structure may be appropriate can include removing existing vegetation, to make way for new site access roads that may require, the removal of a hedgerow where dormice or other protected species may be present, relinking areas for a species reintroduction program, perhaps, that may have historically been severed or fragmented, and then also addressing declines in species due to vehicle collisions, and also used to help improve road safety. Now, projects are rarely simple or straightforward, so I'm going to get on now and share some kind of real-world examples for context. Perhaps some of these will resonate with you and offer a helpful perspective. Now, if you do have a project you're currently working on and obviously have any questions, please put them in the chat, or when the Q&A session happens later, you can ask verbally, because we want you to take away and share as much helpful information from this session as you can. So here are some project examples. This project from last year involved multiple hedgerows being removed as part of a water pipeline project in East Anglia. To satisfy the mitigation license requirements for Hazel dormice, the client had to ensure connectivity between hedgerows was retained, and this was achieved using a variety of temporary bridges in about 5 locations. The bridges were designed to be moved daily to allow work access and machinery movement. And although the project of construction phase has now finished, the bridges remain and will remain until the hedgerows have re-established natural connectivity across those corridors. Now, on the left here, with the pictures 7 and 3, are a few examples where the hedgerow and vegetation was removed prior to the bridges being installed. And this larger picture on the right shows where we've installed a temporary bridge just to help plug this gap between these two lines of trees. This next project example is substation access. So to retain habitat connectivity again for Hazel dormouse, after the construction of a private access road to a substation, an arboreal bridge was installed over the road. Now, this is actually a project in Denmark, and it's a great example of how the end of the bridges or the bridge extends into the existing habitat. Now, although the bridge itself is slightly offset from the main vegetation line, the team have replanted and placed temporary brush and cuttings to ensure immediate connectivity after construction. And you can just see how this has been achieved here on the right-hand side of this picture. And obviously, this is a temporary solution while they wait for new planting and vegetation to become more established, and something that, you know, following on from what kind of Ian said, the amount of impact that some of this construction work can have on habitat, and therefore the, you know, the connection and adaptation or use potentially by dormice is something that we insist is done on all sites where appropriate. Another reason why an arboreal artificial crossing may be considered, maybe a road widening project. Currently, for example, here in the planning stages, an arboreal crossing has been specified actually for red squirrels on the A66, again, to mitigate the habitat impacts and maintain connectivity following the widening of the road. Now, this structure will actually attach to the underside of an underpass, similar to what has been done on the M1, and will extend into appropriate habitat on either side. And here, this on the right-hand side is examples of the M1. And here are just some conceptual engineering drawings of a proposed road to be widened, and yeah, the existing dormouse bridge currently on the M1. And again, you can see here how the bridge extends off a very reasonable distance into the adjacent habitat to ensure that connectivity and ultimately increase the chances for wildlife to encounter the structure and use it. Again, another example why you might consider an artificial structure is perhaps part of a species reintroduction project. And I know enhancements like this are being explored as part of species reintroduction feasibility work. I've been fortunate enough to be involved with a group investigating this for pine martens in Kent, where roads and railways have been identified as potential barriers to dispersal and therefore pose a potential threat to population survival in the future, and could therefore, considering both retrofitted and freestanding crossings, could be beneficial in certain circumstances. And this is just a photo of myself and my colleague Dean standing outside the kind of new pine marten enclosures at Wildwood in Kent, alongside some of Hazel's colleagues, Suzanne and Judy. And kind of sticking on a bit of a road topic, obviously in a related context, we're also examining how interventions can help reduce wildlife vehicle conflicts involving both established and newly introduced species. Now, National Highways and the Devon Wildlife Trust are already seeing the effects of roads on recently introduced pine martens, and data from the New Forest also shows similar impacts on established populations there. Now, research is underway to better understand how these animals actually behave around roads and to learn more about the true impacts that roads have on them. But artificial enhancements are being considered as tools that can potentially improve road safety and reduce potential species decline. Then there's obviously new roads. When planning new roads or railway, it's kind of common to consider artificial mitigation. Ideally, kind of land or green bridges are best. And the UK does have some excellent examples that are currently being built, or have been built, or are planned to be built. However, these are very, very expensive and not always feasible. So smaller scale species-specific interventions, such as the arboreal bridges we're talking about today, are often considered a good option. But the most common reasons we've seen, and me personally as well, seen arboreal bridges considered or implemented within the UK is mitigation for new residential developments. Now, more often than not, this is to satisfy mitigation license requirements, but there are also cases where interventions are actually required as a planning condition requested by a local authority, even when not part of a license. And in many cases, as part of the development, Hedgerows are planned for removal, and the arboreal bridges help to maintain that connectivity by installing a bridge kind of over or under a road, like these examples. And just to highlight, there is a distinct lack of vegetation on all of these pictures here, which again is something we insist is rectified as soon after installation as possible. We understand that these bridges, particularly these ones, will be planted up following the completion of other works, but nonetheless, they are still great examples of actually quite large structures over both roads and pedestrian footpaths. Now, both of these have been installed by Red Row Homes in Wales, and there is also a third one currently planned in the kind of in the final design stages on this same development. And here is a kind of design drawing example of a structure going over a road that kind of actually mimics the one from Denmark that I showed a few slides ago. And it just shows you how the bridge kind of extends up and over the road and then down into habitat on either side. Now, alternatively, bridges may be attached to existing structures, as I showed earlier with the M1 and the A66 example. And like this example, where arboreal bridge is fixed to the underside of it's commonly kind of fixed to like an underside of a concrete culvert or structure, but not limited to that. In this example, this structure mitigates the road's impact on connectivity between vegetation along the watercourse, kind of going east to west. And although the canopy connectivity does actually exist over the watercourse itself, on this project, the client requested that the dormouse crossing span not only the width of the road, but also provides an additional connectivity opportunity north and south. And this picture here in the bottom right is from another project that just kind of illustrates how retrofitting to a box culvert may actually look in real life. So those are just some examples of how, when, and why an arboreal crossing or bridge could be used and potentially should be used on a project. But now, as I promised, I want to move on to kind of share details on the overall timeline and process. And during this section, I'll take you through a kind of step-by-step guide, going from having no bridge to having hopefully a well-used functional bridge or set of bridges in some cases. Now, we've broken this down into kind of key steps, which we'll cover in more detail on the following slides. And that is identifying the need for a bridge, having that need recognized and deemed a requirement. Then we will enter into the design stage, look at submitting the design for approval and then getting the okay. Then the build, which includes fabrication, construction, installation, and then finally, and most importantly, monitoring. Now, we could hold an hour-long session on each of these individual stages, but obviously since we don't have that much time today, I've done our best to kind of condense this into key insights and points to take home. And again, if an arboreal bridge ends up being something you consider as part of this project, please don't hesitate to reach out, and I'll be more than happy to elaborate on anything further. And we also plan to host more sessions like this in the future. So to kick things off, you obviously need to identify the need. You know, do you need an artificial intervention? Then remember, natural connectivity is always the priority. So if this can be achieved, then follow on down that path. If you do come to the conclusion that that is not possible, then implementing something man-made may be a good option. And key things to consider during this stage include understanding and assessing the fragmentation risk to species, both in the long and short term at the local and wider landscape scale. Obviously, exploring the best location for an intervention, both again at the site level and within the wider landscape context. You know, consider what policy is going to influence your decisions and approach, understanding what this is potentially going to cost, and also how long it's going to take and what impact that may have on the overall project's targets and timescales. Now, at this early stage, you may only need to provide indicative details within your reports or planning documents. However, understanding the most appropriate locations and constraints associated with different designs and materials is crucial. Ultimately, you don't want to propose a structure's location only to discover that it's not feasible and have to amend planning and other documents later. So it's better to get informed early and then refine details from there. Unfortunately, we frequently get inquiries from developers almost kind of asking for a dormouse bridge next week with only kind of a red line drawn on a plan, which is obviously far from what's required. And it's almost, well, it definitely is impossible to design and approve and construct a bridge on such short notice. And this is really the kind of main reason of why we wanted to pull and host this webinar today, is to ultimately ensure everybody clearly understands truly what's involved in this process and can therefore plan arboreal crossings and include them and consider them as assets on projects rather than kind of last minute inconveniences. So as I said, please don't hesitate to reach out if you think any arboreal, if you're considering any artificial intervention like this on your projects, and we can provide as much or as little guidance as you need on that. So if you've identified that a bridge is needed, you need to prepare evidence to support your case. Now, this usually takes the form of reports and supporting documentation within the UK in particular, which is obviously a lot of the focus of our talk today. This may involve Natural England and Natural Resources Wales, local planning authorities and/or transport or land agencies, again, all depending on the nature of your project. In some cases, particularly when water is involved, the Environment Agency is also a kind of key stakeholder in that, and we're currently working on a couple of projects, one again particularly in Cardiff, where they are a key stakeholder in that. These stakeholders all have significant influence and may affect, project scope or timings, so maintaining open communications with all parties from earlier stages is really, really essential. And then once the need has been recognised and agreed, this now means the bridge is a requirement and you can move on to the detailed design stage. And this is where you need to engage engineers. Now, for all of the structures I've personally been involved with, we've worked with a team at Campbell Reef who we've collaborated with for kind of the past 10 years. Some clients, in my experience with in-house engineers, may choose to handle the design themselves. This is typically more common on much larger infrastructure projects, and in those cases the kind of project engineers handle most of the design work, and then our team have provided kind of ecological and functional input from there alongside other project teams, ecologists and so on. And although the bridges typically that we supply and are developed with the PTES since the initial research are modular and consist of predetermined components that theoretically kind of fit together like puzzle pieces, we can't simply stick them together and put them up over a road on demand. Each project requires detailed engineering to determine material types, the span, height, foundations, supports, and all of this in relation to habitat and individual site conditions. And then once all this is designed, we have a kind of clear plan for how the entire bridge will be built and whereabouts that will be. Then after the design is complete, it proceeds to approval and then onto fabrication and installation from there. Now, again, at every stage, it's important to maintain that open dialogue with authorities, and again, typically road agencies, as well as planning authorities in your region, because again, it's much better to get their input early than face costly delays and redesigns later. And just to highlight a few common topics that are often raised during design discussions. Design life requirements, does an authority want this to last only 10 years or do they want it to last only 100 years? You need to know that early because that will considerably impact the costs and also, and therefore, the materials used. Maintenance needs and schedules, who is responsible for looking after this in the short and long term, any additional safety concerns they may have, potentially crash barriers in front of support posts may be a requirement due to the proximity of those support posts to the road. Security, any anti-climb features to prevent interaction from the public, and then also color and visibility. Are there any aesthetic design considerations that a client or a stakeholder may have? The timeline for this kind of design stage can vary, again, depending on delays. So Typically, if you're kind of waiting for data needed for the design, can be a bit of a delay. This may include topographical information, habitat mapping, and underground services. Data all has an impact and is all required to conduct that detailed design. So the earlier you begin to, again, engage all stakeholders and kind of, guess, gatekeepers of this, this data and this information, the smoother this process will be. We've seen some projects completed in 3 to 6 months from the identification all the way through to the installation, while others have taken multiple years and multiple phases within a construction period. The design delays aren't always caused by the Arboreal Bridge themselves. Often when a bridge is considered as part of a larger project, things like road or utility layouts as part of that project may be adjusted, and therefore what was originally designed for the bridge and where it was going to be also needs to be adjusted and tweaked. So just obviously bear that in mind. And typical costs for the design phase of bridges we've seen within the UK is around between £5,000 and £7,000 per bridge. And again, this depends on the complexity, the number of structures, because you anticipate and expect if multiple bridges are considered on a project, then that overall design cost will be reduced. Now, approvals and building the bridges. So if you've engaged your stakeholders early, again, this will be straightforward. However, if you're submitting these plans alongside other plans, you can expect it to take longer. Again, each authority has its own review timeline, but they should be transparent on this so you can plan accordingly. As part of the approval process, especially for long-term or permanent structures, you will likely need an AIP or an agreement in principle. And this is a comprehensive, formal pre-design approval document that outlines the design, review, and approval of a highway structure. And it includes the scope, standards, loads, geotechnical data, durability, maintenance strategies, and amongst a whole host of other things. So if an arboreal crossing, if an arboreal crossing is combined with another structure like an underpass, they can often be included under a single AIP. But again, check with your planning team and the Highways Authority again if a road is involved in that. A typical cost we have seen for AIPs range again between £5,000 and £7,000, and then combining the design fees and the AIP, you're looking at around £10,000 to £15,000 per bridge within the UK. Then once everything is approved, you're looking at getting everything built. Again, I keep saying this a lot, but early planning is crucial here, especially if the structure is part of a broader construction scheme, because coordinating things such as groundworks and the installation alongside other site works, such as foundations or both concrete and or screw piling, for example, saves time and cost. Now, too often, as I mentioned earlier, arboreal crossings are left as a kind of final sign-off item, and this results in delays and unnecessary expenses for the potential client if you're working on behalf of, or obviously if it's your money you're spending, it's your money. So including them early in that planning stage ensures they're built efficiently as part of a main contract or construction schedule. And fabrication and construction are typically the shortest stage in this entire process. So although we can provide, and understand indicative costs at the start of a project for all the materials that are going to be used and ultimately make up the bridge or bridges themselves, this isn't really only able to be confirmed or refined until the final design and approval stage. And then this would typically be agreed upon before fabrication. Now, typical fabrication costs per metre of a bridge within the UK vary depending on the material choice, the distance, the style or number of required supports that structure may have. So good budgetary costs to consider range between kind of £500 for potential stainless steel rope structures, which I'll talk about more later, up to kind of around £1,500 for solid steel. But with aluminium kind of sitting in the middle range of that, which is the most common structure we've designed and installed in recent years, at around about £1,000 per metre. Obviously, during your early budget stages, it's important to budget accordingly. So allowing any contingency for potential alterations and obviously the rise of inflation, if your project is expected to span multiple years, is very, very sensible. But overall, these costs are higher than some of the structures, particularly that Tremaine will share from around the world shortly. And this is mainly because these structures in the UK are more substantial and require this to kind of adhere to the UK highway safety and engineering requirements that we have in this country. One thing we are continuously doing is exploring ways to improve the functionality and ultimately reduce the costs so that we can see kind of we can help to enable kind of wider consideration and implementation of these structures. And we always look at the most economical ways to produce structures on every single project. And this is, again, more reason why sharing information during sessions like this and with other researchers, such as Tremaine and colleagues, is so important, because together, globally, we're all kind of improving our understanding and approach to finding solutions that ultimately manage the conflicts we all face in the most kind of financially and ecologically conscious way possible for reducing habitat fragmentation. Just a quick note on budgetary planning and bridge lengths or distances. Now, I often get told or asked for bridges of a set distance, but the measurement is often based on a kind of bird's eye or plan view. For example, here from point A to point B, and doesn't actually take into account any changes in elevation or extensions of that structure that may be needed or will be needed and required to go a reasonable distance into appropriate habitat and vegetation. So for example, here, when looking at this view from above, it might appear that a bridge will span a certain number of meters. And here, the road width itself is 15 meters for argument's sake. However, when you actually view the entire structure and elevation, you can see that the span over the road itself is 15 meters. Then you have additional lengths of bridge needed to kind of get either down or up, depending on which way you look at it, from the habitat height either side. And then you have that extension of extra bridge into the habitat on either side. So ultimately, you have a structure that was perceived to just need to cross a 15-meter road gap, actually turns out to be a 35-meter long arboreal structure. And just to highlight something, we kind of insist a minimum of 2 meters of bridge extending into suitable vegetation at each end. But the more of a structure that you can kind of embed or entangle, whatever way you want to kind of describe it, become engulfed in vegetation, then there's an increased likelihood that animals will be able to find and therefore use it. And just to come back to the culvert river example from earlier, again, technically, the habitat gap we're connecting here is just the width of the road, but the arboreal bridge itself has to extend from well inside the habitat, down the bank, under the road, attaching to the crossing, and then back up onto the other side. Now, to date, all the bridges that we've been involved with have been made in the UK by a small team. However, we do have the capability to produce structures in any country. So I know there are many people joining today from abroad. So if this is something you're considering more local to you, then please let us know, and we can utilise local partners to ensure that same level of environmental and economic efficiency and compliance in your country. We've managed, as I said, the kind of earliest to kind of turn around projects within a 4-week turnaround from when the design has been approved and completed. Although depending on material availability and design complexity, obviously this can vary. These types of bridges are not typically stock items, although we do personally kind of carry a small inventory particularly for this dormouse design I'm showing here. So allowing about 2 to 3 months for fabrication again is sensible, but we do understand obviously how critical project deadlines can be, and we always do what we can to meet them. And again, keep saying it, but communication and preparation is key. And in an ideal world, once your kind of design is approved and your groundworks and installation preparations, it's best kind of have your groundworks and installation preparations happening simultaneously while the rest of the bridge is being fabricated. Then when kind of both are complete, everything can arrive on site and is assembled, and wildlife can hopefully begin using it at the earliest possible opportunity. Now, in reality, that perfect sequence doesn't always happen, but generally installation is straightforward, and most bridges we've worked on have been installed within a day or two. Some key points for structures over the roads: the supports are typically erected first with the help of a HIAB or a crane, and then bridge sections themselves are installed section by section using a small team and perhaps a mobile elevated work platform such as a cherry picker or scissor lift. Excuse me. Depending on the design, some parts can be pre-assembled off-site and lifted in by crane, but again, this must be properly assessed and have suitable lifting pans in place and may not be appropriate for all projects. Obviously, on active roads or in areas, timing can be flexible, but on inactive roads or areas, timing may be more flexible for when you install this. But obviously, for active roads, then you're going to have to consider traffic management and timing for that. And then just when attaching to any existing structures, the same principles apply, but brackets are typically installed at uniform spacings, either kind of all at once or section by section along with a bridge. And then once the bridge is installed, there are several important considerations to be made. And remember, these structures are man-made substitutes of vegetation, so they must connect to vegetation to function properly. Now, vegetation, as Ian said earlier, may have been cleared, impacted, or absent entirely from a project, so it's vital to replant or restore vegetation around each bridge end at the earliest possible opportunity. And again, we insist at least a minimum of 2 meters, but ideally more, of the bridges are kind of entangled within vegetation. And we recommend, particularly within the UK, using native fast-growing species, perhaps supplemented with brash and cuttings in that meantime, while you're waiting for that natural vegetation to fully establish. And again, just to call back to that project in Denmark, where they've placed the cuttings against the end of the structure. Please don't do what we've seen on some sites and leave or neglect this, because if you do, you know, to be brutally honest, you might as well not have put a bridge there in at all. And I'm not going to use this as an opportunity to kind of name and shame anyone or any projects I'm aware of, but you know, if anybody on this call or who catches up with this recording later does ever see an arboreal crossing that seems to be isolated from vegetation, you shouldn't be surprised that there may not be any data on its effectiveness. And it would be sensible to find out who owns or is responsible for that structure and then provide some friendly advice to help fix and rectify that problem. Oh. And monitoring. Monitoring is equally important, and often sometimes that gets forgotten about and also not budgeted for, which is really, really disappointing and a shame. And this is something that we're particularly sensitive to and are doing everything that we can when working on projects to offer time and resource to ensure monitoring is being conducted. Now, this is something that is continually evolving, but there are some key and current methods used, and this is something we're continually in discussion and working with PTES about, trying to understand what is best in what situations, both in the short and long term. Cameras provide quick results, but can be difficult to access, particularly if you imagine a structure is 6 meters in the air. Footprint tunnels, again, on the bridges or in habitat, same challenges for access if on a structure. Effective, but again, require a lot of maintenance and time and resource. Population surveys in habitats either side of structures is obviously going to give you the best and most detailed view on the structure success over a potentially longer period of time, and offers insights into kind of dormouse numbers and potential movements. And then, genetic testing in extreme circumstances where possible provides obviously that next level of robust confirmation of population exchange. But obviously, however you decide to monitor, please do monitor. And as I said, we have plenty of resources and support to help you with monitoring, as well as the rest of the process. So any questions, please don't ask. And if you are monitoring anything, please share any results from your studies when you are able to. And I think that's probably, we just hit over the hour mark now. So this is probably a good time just to take a short break, as I'm sure, you've had enough of me talking for quite a while. So if we come back, say at 1:15, we then have the pleasure of welcoming Tremaine Gregory from the WWF, who will share some insights from her work in South America, but also share a little bit of a preview and look at Canopy Bridges from across the world. So yeah, see you back here at 1:15. During this break, I'll just pull up the Slido actually, so that you can see some questions.
Steve, can you hear me?
Yes, Nadine. Yes, I can.
Just a quick question. I know you're sat by a window. Do you
Yeah,
have a light or something? Because we can barely see you.
yeah, I did notice
Yeah.
that. I've kind of gone a bit like a halo, haven't I?
Yeah,
I don't know
every
what's
now
going
and
on
then
there.
it's just like a white bit.
Am I back? Do I look more human now?
Yeah, that looks
I
fine.
think so. Yeah, I did see that, but I didn't know how to kind of rectify that while I was talking at the same time. So
No,
apologies.
I know. I don't want to like interrupt you, so I was like, I'll let him know in the break.
I appreciate that. I will just quickly grab a drink and then come back.
Hi, Steve, are you there?
Hi everyone, welcome back. I can see there's some good questions coming in via Zoom, and then we've got a few more on Slido as well. But now we are back. It is my pleasure to introduce Tremaine Gregory from the WWF, who's kindly giving up our time to give us a bit of a snapshot of Canopy Bridge work from across the globe. So Tremaine, can I hand over to you?
Yes, thanks so much, Steve. And thanks for inviting me here with you. It's been super cool to listen to the previous presentations and to learn more about dormice and to learn more about the extent of all that you're doing. So I'm going to talk about how the scene is quite different in the rest of the world. It'll just be a brief presentation. There's a lot more to say, but I hope I can give you a bit of a snapshot. So I'm at the World Wildlife Fund, and I'm also a research associate at the Smithsonian. So we could go to the next slide, please. So you can just go ahead and click through here, Steve. I just wanted to show some of the different groups of arboreal animals that we have around the world. As you can see, there are many. We've been learning about rodents today, and actually the order Rodentia is very diverse. We have not only dormice and squirrels, but also all kinds of different rat species, spiny rat species, porcupines. That are native to the Amazon and other parts of the world. There are the didelphomorphs, which are the possums with an O, the opossums, you could say, the marsupials that are predominantly in the New World also. And then we have the possums with no O, the koalas and other animals that live in the treetops in Australia. Then amongst the carnivora, there's a lot of diversity also. We have the procyonids, which includes the raccoons and the kinkajous. We also have animals like tyra and other forms of cats that are up in the canopy. We have the pelosa, which are the anteaters and the sloths. And then the primates, which is an extremely diverse group that spans the globe, everything from tarsiers and other prosimians like lemurs, galagos, bush babies, same thing, galagos. And then we also have monkeys, which are found throughout the Americas, Africa, Asia, tiny bit in Southern Europe. And then apes. The gibbons that are in Southeast Asia are highly arboreal species. They almost never come down to the ground. And then orangutans are also highly arboreal. Chimpanzees and gorillas tend to be both terrestrial and arboreal. So you can see that there are a lot of different species that we're, let's say, solving for when we build canopy bridges. And all of these animals face the same challenges that were discussed by the other speakers with regard to fragmentation from linear infrastructure. So it's really important to look for solutions for all of them. So if we can go to the next slide. For lack of a map of canopy dwelling species across the world or arboreal species across the world, I thought I'd use this map showing global canopy height. And it kind of gives you an idea of where there is likely to be more diversity and abundance of species that are really reliant on traveling in the treetops. So you can see in the Amazon, there's a huge swath of very high forest, and there are animals there that never come down to the ground. They really are not well adapted to being on the ground. They're very fearful when they do so. So it's important to have solutions there. You have in the Congo Basin, same challenge, and then also into Southeast Asia, and then many other parts of the world. So we can go to the next slide. And when we look at these different animals that live in the treetops, it's really important to understand their anatomy and how they move. You can do a couple more clicks there. Here's just the diversity of primates in the world, and you can see that they travel in many different ways. We have these arboreal quadrupeds like the capuchin on the left, which grasp trees. Please take a look at how they're grasping onto that branch with their hands oriented 90 degrees. And then we have species like, if you click once or two more times, you can see what are called the hangers there, but some people call them suspensory locomotors, or they suspend themselves through the treetops. Those are the gibbons, and then the orangutans are considered quadrimanous. They use all four limbs as if they were arms. And then we have groups like the adelines, the spider monkeys, howler monkeys. Those guys use prehensile tails. So these are just showing locomotor patterns in the primates. But of course, with looking at all that arboreal mammal and, sorry, I forgot to highlight the reptiles on that slide. Looking at all that diversity, it's really important to understand how they move when we build solutions for them. And I just wanted to highlight this paper here. This was a paper written a couple of years ago demonstrating that spider monkeys, a really important group of species across the neotropics, big frugivores that are really important for seed dispersal, had not been shown by the time of that paper in 2022 to use canopy bridges at all in a survey of hundreds of researchers. So we really need to think about their behavior and their biomechanics in order to understand how they move and how to develop solutions for them. Okay, next slide. So I just wanted to show a little smattering of the literature on canopy bridges. So this is data we looked at a couple of years ago, and this was in 2022 when we compiled these data, and we were looking at the number of canopy bridges written yearly, and then we realized that there really had very little had been written. There are a lot of canopy bridges, especially in the neotropics, but a lot of times they're grassroots projects and people don't necessarily publish on their results, making it difficult to learn from them, and really emphasizing that point that Steve made about the importance of monitoring and how, if you don't produce data from your work, others cannot learn from it. You may find that a certain design doesn't work at all for a specific species. So working with a few colleagues, we worked with Folia Primatologica to have a special issue on canopy bridges across the world, not just primates. And in that special issue, we we were able to receive 22 submissions, and that really spiked up the amount of papers on Canopy bridges and helped us move the field forward. A couple more clicks there. So here you can see the geographic spread of those papers. A lot has been written in Australia. There's a team that's been working on this really hard for a number of years. There's a lot in Brazil. And then in several other countries. But you can see if you think back to that map that showed the canopy height across the world, there are a lot of areas that are not covered here. So we don't really know what's working for all of those animals. Okay, next slide. So I'm just going to go over what we have learned from that literature, what we know about canopy bridges and what animals seem to prefer, just a little bit of an overview. And I like starting by talking about natural bridges because, as Steve said, animals really prefer a natural substrate. These images represent two different studies that I've contributed to. The one on the left is actually me climbing a tree. I'm like 100 feet up in a tree there. This was a place where we left natural canopy connectivity over a natural gas pipeline in the Amazon as it was being built, and then we monitored it with camera traps. And then the picture on the right is in the Brazilian Amazon, where an indigenous community, after a road was built in the 1980s, they worked with the Transport Authority to allow natural canopy connectivity to be restored over the road because of the importance of arboreal species to their culture. And in both cases, over 25 species use these natural bridges. In the right-hand case, we actually were able to compare with artificial bridges, and we found only 9 species so far using those artificial bridges. So animals much prefer natural bridges, which is interesting to see. Oh, and then, sorry, if you click once, you can see a little smattering of some of those species that use the bridge in the Peruvian Amazon, the left-hand picture. Okay, next slide. Oh, sorry, I put in a couple of videos here just because they're just so much fun to watch. This is just a plug for canopy camera trapping. You get the most amazing information. We can't hear this sound, so it's pretty funny, though, this little snorting porcupine. And then the next one is porcupine. So these cameras, sorry, that was porcupine. These are capuchin monkeys. These cameras are about, let's say, 50 to 60 feet up in the trees. So there's a lot happening up there. And these are natural bridges over that road in the Brazilian Amazon that I referenced. So, and they're making little funny capuchin monkey noises. Okay, next slide. So along with those natural bridges, some researchers are using natural materials to form the bridges. So looking at the other presenter slides and thinking about the bridges in the UK made me think about how different bridges look in a lot of the rest of the world. And I'm going to be showing some more slides of those, but in a lot of cases, bridges in the rest of the world are not built with aluminum or steel. They're built with ropes, or in this case, you can see natural materials. And I was asking myself why that's the case. I think that it's definitely a cost issue. A lot of teams don't have the funds to build more substantial bridges. There's also differences in regulations. If there is less regulation, then it's possible for grassroots organizations to build bridges without necessarily a lot of administrative work. But then also I think there's a materials challenge because the aluminum would be much hotter in a tropical climate. And I think animals would be resistant to using it because it would just be too hot, even like a slightly enclosed, like the triangular structure. So I think that's the predominant reason for that. But here you can see one study in South Africa, they use bamboo. And then on the right is another experiment we did in Peru where we used a vine. It was just a single liana that was about 2 inches in diameter that we strung across a road that was about 60 feet wide, and animals immediately started using it. It was really amazing to see. So they love a natural substrate. Okay, next. And then there are many different forms of artificial materials that people are using. I love some of the creative solutions here. You can see the recycled seat belts. Those have been really useful, and also the agricultural mesh, modified agricultural mesh. Those have been great where people are concerned about theft of the bridges themselves. So they can use these materials that people are not really interested in stealing. There's amazing work from Indonesia with, can we go back just a second? With irrigation tubing, where the community has gotten involved in monitoring and building the bridges because they double as irrigation areas. Then we have other forms down there, and finally the steel and cable encased in rope, which has been a terrific solution for developing kind of a natural substrate with the rope, but also the steel to provide more stability. Okay, next. And then again, these are the bridges that we've been seeing, along with the ones in the UK and in Denmark. There's the example in Japan that's been discussed. The next slide. And then there have been several experiments with these sort of three-dimensional bridges. There are some examples from Costa Rica and Australia there. These are built of rope, and that makes them, I think, a little bit more flexible to span larger ranges. Next. And then we have a lot of examples are ladders and lattices. So here you can see an example from Kenya, which is super cool, where this is spanning a pretty busy road. Animals are crossing on these ladder structures. At the bottom is an example from Argentina, where a group of students, children from a school, built a bridge that was very successful. Okay, next. And then a lot of people have begun to study the use of single lines and to see how animals may prefer just a single line that's a little bit more like a branch. And how I referenced earlier, the way the animals turn their little hands and feet, really this is easier for them to grasp perhaps than the lattice design may be. And next. So we've, yeah, go ahead and play the video there. We've also learned that a lot of canopy bridges have been anchored to trees when there hasn't been the resources to anchor to concrete posts. But obviously anchoring in concrete posts is much better for spanning big expanses like this example in Costa Rica. That's a 4-lane highway. So next slide. We can go to the next slide. So what's been really important, though, is to start to do experimental studies. Yeah, you can go ahead and play the videos there. You can see that here we're comparing whether animals prefer a single line or a double line, and they show a clear preference for the single line. I'm only showing one example here, but it's really interesting to see in this example in Brazil, animals much prefer, as I was saying, probably because of their grasping habits, the single line. Sorry, if you can go back one. And then on the bottom, the other video, oh, maybe it's not playing. I just wanted to show that these are two different double line bridges provided, but still this kinkajou prefers to move on one side of the double line, maybe showing that it too prefers a single line. Okay, next. And then people are beginning to develop solutions for these suspensory and quadrumanous animals. If you click the video on the far left, you can see an orangutan. This is actually here in the city I live in. Whoops, that turned sideways. But this is an orangutan crossing what's called the O-line in the National Zoo. It's a giant crossing structure built here. So they need these different solutions. Okay, next. We can go to the next video, or next slide, sorry. Finally, it's been really important to develop solutions for animals with prehensile tails so they have a place to grasp. Oh, excuse me. I love the example on the right where the capuchin monkeys, sorry, the howler monkeys are grasping the line above. Again, that was this very simple design with agricultural mesh, but with the second line that's allowing the animals to have a place to grasp with their tails and allows for more stability. Okay, next. And in this final example, I just wanted to show a design we've been beginning to use in Brazil that sort of combines all those different designs. It's got the two-dimensional mesh design at the bottom that some animals like to even rest on. It's got a single line right above it where these little marmoset monkeys are traveling on. And then up above, if you do one more click, you'll see that spider monkeys use it to attach their tails. So that's been a really successful design that combines all those things together. So that's it for me, Steve. I'd be happy to answer any questions. I know there's a lot of differences about having to do with what you're doing in the UK versus other parts of the world. So thanks very much.
Thank you so much. I think and again, when we kind of, sorry, I put my microphone back down. No, thank you so much. What I find so interesting and what we've spoken about previously when we kind of met at ICOET earlier this year is, and kind of almost calling back a little bit to what Ian mentioned towards the start, is there's actually so much that needs to be considered from like a biomechanical perspective in terms of a design of a structure to ensure if it will, potentially be used by wildlife, then people may not believe or think about. Particularly, we've seen that within the UK historically is, oh, I need a bridge, and then some, typically, and it's not through anybody's kind of fault. It's just these are very strange things to be kind of considered or planning in any development. So, without a prior understanding or knowledge, typically this would fall to an engineer. They just go, oh, I think this would be good for said species, but again, without that ecological input or understanding. And that's where kind of, what within the UK, within PTES, that we kind of built on, that lack of knowledge and started to add knowledge through the trials and things that we did in the Isle of Wight, and then kind of, taking what we understood worked biologically, from a design, and proved that that was useful and were used by predominantly dormice and red squirrels, and then worked on the engineering to enable that to be considered and applied to roads in this situation. And that's kind of, mirrored in what you've just presented with just different species. I know we haven't had a chance to kind of demonstrate other examples in Australia when they have kind of glider poles and things, but ultimately it's that coming together of ecologists and engineers and breaking down that barrier and working together to find artificial solutions, ultimately, isn't it, when canopy natural connectivity is not possible. And I think that's what's kind of, it's kind of unfortunate in the sense that we have to be considering and looking at these enhancements, because natural connectivity is always vital, but in the kind of growing world, then that is seemingly, impossible in some circumstances. So we have to lean into this as viable options. So really, really appreciate you kind of sharing that, and especially I hope for those of the UK who may, on the call, who may not necessarily be aware of other canopy bridges, or those that, this is the first insight into this world, this niche area, even within the transport ecology and road ecology world, that this has been a really useful, interesting insight, and kind of hopefully just made you kind of hungry to go and find out more information about it. So yeah, to dive into, I guess, Hazel, have you got any other comments or regards on that before we dive into kind of Q&A? I think we've lost Ian, unfortunately. He had to leave early. But Hazel, yeah, sorry.
Yeah, interesting what Tremaine was saying about the way that the primates grasp the ropes and preferring the single ropes, because dormice do actually grasp in a similar way. They have the sort of short thumb, have a very short thumb, but have it over one side of the branch, and then the other fingers together, a bit like sort of Charlie Chaplin, we say, as they walk along. And they sometimes run along underneath ropes as well. But maybe the main difference with those is that they're being so small, they're very vulnerable to predation, and so they don't really like being exposed on a single rope. Unlike maybe larger primates might not be so conscious of that.
I think that's what's so interesting, seeing some of the videos we shared from earlier that we've seen from the studies, is particularly dormice just like to clamber in, out, on top and around everything, which is really interesting and really fascinating to see, especially with a species like that nobody really ever comes into contact with, do they? They're such a mysterious creature. And then even during that monitoring, what was kind of hard, and I'll touch on this as someone's raised, I'll go into more detail this in terms of monitoring, is they move so fast, you know, so like cameras is great to, you know, one camera is good, one camera's not so good, and how you determine that, you know, you could, one camera could trigger and then the dormice has gone past it and then picked up again. So that's something, as I said earlier, we're continually looking at and working, you know, I guess globally to kind of understand what's best ways to monitor different species and populations on different types of structures. So, so just to kind of recap what we've looked at today. Again, as I've said a million times, remember, arboreal bridges should potentially only be considered when natural connectivity isn't possible. We've explored how to identify the need for an arboreal crossing. We've examined how to establish that need as a formal requirement. We've discussed what's involved in the design and approval stages. We looked at fabrication and construction processes, and then this was all bookended by wonderful ecological insights from Hazel, Ian, and Tremaine. For again, I'm extremely grateful for having you all kind of with us today. And I guess Tremaine and Hazel, do you have any final remarks before we close out?
I just want to recognize the fact that I shared a lot of different people's studies and data, and I did my best to use their names in the presentation, but I'm very grateful to them. There's only a small portion of what I shared was my research. And I'd also like to point out that what I said at the beginning, that spider monkeys are not using bridges. If you noticed in the presentation, they definitely are. By now, we're developing solutions that work. So when we work on it, when we gather the data, we really can learn what the solutions look like. So thank you very much for having me today, Steve.
Pleasure. Hazel.
Yeah, just to say that, yeah, the more, I agree with Tremaine, the more data we can collect and the more examples that we can get, the better, really, so that we can understand how the dormice use the bridges. And just to say that I think with camera trapping, it can be quite difficult to detect dormice. From our own experience with dormice in captivity, they can completely elude cameras, quite often being so small and fast. And it may be that, you know, we have more crossings than we actually record because they're just not being picked up by the cameras themselves. But yes, yeah, I think it's great that there's more awareness of the need for the bridges and the different options that can be provided. And I look forward to sort of seeing some more evidence in the future that bridges are being used by dormice.
Perfect, thank you. So yeah, just a few closing remarks from myself. As I said, we're continually looking for ways to kind of improve arboreal bridges, both for wildlife and for people installing and maintaining them. So if anybody on the call or your colleagues have ideas and insights, or just generally curious, obviously, please don't hesitate to reach out to us. We are working on putting together an international working group and kind of discussion group that aims to meet kind of regularly to share and discuss everything to do with this. So we obviously welcome everybody's input on that. I am, as I said, currently reviewing data from various monitored bridge over the past kind of few years and hope to be able to share this with you soon. If you'd like to see a kind of arboreal bridge in the UK up close, because typically a lot of the ones installed on roads are very difficult or impossible to get to without particular permissions, you can visit Wildwood Wildlife Park in Kent, where we've recently installed a kind of demonstration bridge, which is really cool and allows both professionals and the public to see what a structure like this can look like, and then gives people an opportunity to learn about, again, why and when they may be used. We're also kind of looking at new steel rope bridge designs, and again, plan for installation and monitoring on some sites next year. And we'll be showcasing various kind of bridge components and project insights at the new Ecology Expo in March next year. And again, that's also when we hope to update some more kind of best practice on written guidance. And then just to leave you with this, here are some kind of initial images captured of various animals interacting with some of the temporary bridges I mentioned earlier that were installed. No dormice so far, but we have got a lot. I've only looked at a few cameras just prior to putting this webinar together. We've got a lot of data to analyze, but you can see here there's already like a plethora of kind of species you would expect to see within a kind of native UK hedgerow within the UK. And that's it. So thanks again. Pretty much bang on the 2 hours there. As I said, a recording of this session will be shared with everybody within the next few days. Thank you again for all your contributions, attendance, and again, Tremaine Gregory and Hazel for joining me, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you very much, Steve. Thanks all. Bye-bye.